Yeah. So, all right. So I put up a poll and I was just extremely curious, kind of where people stand on this. And a very simple question. In your opinion, what percentage of success in TCGs is pay to win? Now, before I kind of get into talking about this, I do want to make one thing clear. This is more in reference to the more competitive scene. Now, one thing I've been seeing over the internet, especially these last couple weeks with the store championships being a thing, there have been a decent amount of complaining about, oh, you know, the game is so pay to win. You know, I went to this championship to try to win the Stitch mat or win the Stitch card, and I just go up against all of these crazy meta decks, and like, man, that's just so unfair. I just want to set the record straight that for events like that, like OTS championships or eventually nationals or worlds or whatever like that, that's where it is perfectly valid and honestly the correct time to be playing those decks. All right, those events aren't meant to be played casually. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go into these events and play like your pet deck or some casual deck or not one of the top meta contenders, but you need to understand that you can't go into these with that kind of mindset and with that kind of deck and be upset or mad that people are playing more competitive decks, because that's where you are going to see them. Now, if you're going to a locals, if you're going to the kitchen table and you want to do that and there's some people playing those decks, okay, I can kind of see the complaint. But at events like that, like, if you're going to one of those, you need to go into that with the mindset of you're going to see the top deck, for the most part, the top decks in the format. So kind of complaining about that is one of my least favorite things that's happening right now. And I saw a lot of that, and it just got me thinking about the idea of pay to win. And I think these results are very interesting. And I kind of just picked these numbers sort of out of the blue, right? What percentage of success in TCGs is pay to win? So I said, and what I mean more is like the reason behind it, right? Like, what percentage of the reason behind it is pay to win? So is it like less than 10%, 11 to 25%, 26 to 50%, or over 50%? Basically meaning that, like, is someone's success in a tournament or in any card game less than 10% because of money, 50% because of money? Like, how exactly do you quantify this? And these results are incredibly split. Like, incredibly split. I'm honestly shocked at how split they are. And you know, you have the people who pick over 50%, and I feel like a lot of those people are more casual players who say, yeah, like, the only reason my opponent won is because they spent more money than me, or whatever. So I want to talk about just this idea of money in TCGs and the impact it makes. And this isn't just about Lorcana or Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or One Piece or whatever card game you play. This is card games across the board. And one example I like to use in terms of like the difference between the two is video games, right? So you can make the argument that in video games it's like mostly skill, or at least the video games that are designed to not have any pay to win mechanics. People start disliking video games once a pay to win mechanic is entered. Like, if you pay a certain amount of money, then you get the super uber mega weapon where, you know, you have such an advantage over everyone else. I know that was a problem in Star Wars Battlefront, but But no, it's like in its purest form in a video game, you know, your skill dictates how much you rank up or level up, things like that, or at least in my opinion, in the good ones. Card games are a little different because while skill is so important in card games, like you can't discount decision making and deck building and things like that. You can't discount those things, right? But you also need to actually acquire the physical cards, right? Especially if you're playing in like a tournament. Like if you're playing in a tournament, you can't use proxies. You can't do anything like that. You need to acquire the cards. And what is the best way to acquire cards? Well, there's actually a couple ways, right? You open packs, which again, if we were to compare it to a video game, is more of a loot box system. All right, like in video games, you have these loot boxes where you can kind of open them at random and then you get the thing, right? And you can make the argument that that's how card games are. You have these packs, which is more of like a loot box system. You get what you get and you use what you get. The other way, obviously, is to buy singles. Now, if we were to take TCGs and put them in like their purest form, right? Let's pretend there wasn't a singles market in TCGs, and TCGs were played the way they're basically designed to be played, where you buy booster packs, right? Or starter decks or structure decks or whatever, and you build a deck, and then over time you acquire booster packs and you use that acquisition to upgrade your deck, and then you go around with friends and you trade cards that you might need and trade them with cards that they might need, and that upgrades each other's decks. Like when you think about, you know, back in the day when you're doing like Playground Yu-Gi-Oh or Playground Pokemon, like that's kind of how it went, right? You didn't really, at least when we were kids, as I certainly didn't have access to it, didn't go on eBay all that much to buy cards. Like that's how card games were initially designed in like their purest form. And this is how these companies who make these card games still kind of design them to be. But see, here's the fly in the ointment, where there's a singles market and people sell cards, and cards have a monetary value, right? Cards have a monetary value. Some cards are worth more or less than other cards. Rarer cards are worth more than common cards. Meta relevant cards are worth more than non-meta relevant cards for the most part. And that's kind of where things start to get a little messy. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Right now, the best deck is Snake Eye. And Snake Eye has a lot of high rarity cards that are not just high rarity, but they're also obviously meta relevant. So the value of those cards shoot to the moon. Magic the Gathering has a million different formats, and certain cards are better in other formats, and some of those cards are older or haven't been reprinted or things like that, or just rarer, so the value of those cards go up. In Lorcana has a very limited card pool, so cards that are good in Lorcana are just staples in every deck, almost like you have to have this sort of thing. Like a card that comes to mind is the Sad Beast, right? Like you can play that in basically any steel deck because it's generic enough and it doesn't really interfere with what you're doing. It just helps you. That's a staple card, and Sad Beast is like, I don't know, a $40 to $50 card. So when you think about it, right, a deck with Sad Beast in it is better than a deck without Sad Beast in it in a vacuum, right? And Sad Beast is harder to pull because it's a legendary, and it's more expensive because it's a legendary and it's meta relevant. So whoever has the Sad Beast will have more of an advantage over the person who doesn't have the Sad Beast, right? Not only that, the person who has a full playset of Sad Beast will consistently see Sad Beast than someone who only has 1 or 2 copies of Sad Beast. And obviously the amount of that card you have affects your deck building. So yes, money plays a huge factor, because you're not pulling these chase cards out of packs that often because they're rare. You either need to shell out a lot of money to open a lot of packs, or you shell out a lot of money to buy singles. So the idea that money doesn't have any factor in the results of TCGs is, in my opinion, incorrect. Now, there's obviously exceptions. In Lorcana, you have kind of that budget Amethyst Steel deck that won some stuff, but for the most part, like decks with the really good Ursula or Maleficent Dragon or Rapunzel or Beast, like those are the cards for the most part that are winning, right? There's exceptions to the rule in every card game. That's just how it is, but for the most part, those cards that are in high need are the ones that are winning and topping and things like that. So to say that money plays a small or no part in the success in a TCG, I think is just wrong. All right, if you are willing to shell out a significant amount of money, whatever that means to you, right? I'm not a financial advisor or anything like that. I'm not going to tell you what you consider a significant amount of money. In my opinion, a significant amount of money, if you're willing to shell that out, then you are using that resource to improve your odds at winning, because you're using that resource to make your deck better. Now, that being said, so like I think the less than 10% crowd, I don't agree with this. Okay, now let's go to the other side, the over 50% crowd, where basically what they're saying is the majority of someone's success is based on how much money they spend. I don't agree with that either, because in any card game, there is such a huge level of skill involved, and decision making and deck building. All of those things factor as well. If I hand over the Fire King Snake Eye deck to someone who's never played it and doesn't know how it works, they're not going to win with that deck, most likely, right? Because they don't know the ins and outs of it. They don't know all the optimized plays right off the bat. The deck doesn't carry itself like that, and you can say that about really any deck, giving it to any new player. Sure, maybe they'll get lucky, right? But if you put them in a tournament setting, they're not really going to get that far at all, right? So there is skill involved in Yu-Gi-Oh! When it comes to hand traps, right? Which cards do you hand trap? What hand traps you side in or put in your main deck? How many times you summon cards to not get a Nibiru in your face? In Lorcana, what cards do you ink? What cards do you challenge? Do you sacrifice your board to take something off your opponent's board? Do you exert something even though it's vulnerable to something else? What cards do you mulligan? Same kind of thing in Magic or Pokemon, right? Like, these are all decisions, in-game decisions that you need to make, and those decisions require, I think, a certain level of thought and skill. There's also the deck building aspect of it, right? I hate to say it, but just kind of throwing all your favorite cards together usually doesn't result in winning. Like, there is an optimized way to build decks, and that requires play testing. That requires trying out certain matchups and seeing how it goes. For the games that have sideboards, what cards do you sideboard, whether in Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh or whatever, to go against certain matchups? Deck building is so important, and yes, you need to spend money to get those pieces to build the deck, but what are you doing with those cards once you get them, right? You know, I can go out and buy an insanely nice car, right? A super nice car, and it's beautiful and it's amazing, but if I don't know how to drive the car, or I don't know how to drive the car correctly, then what's the point of that car? It's sitting in the driveway. Or when I do take it out to drive, not knowing how to drive, I get into a car accident or something, I don't know, and it doesn't work out for me. You can make a very similar argument with the TCG thing, where it's like, you get a bunch of good cards, but if you don't know how to deploy them or know how to build your deck, then you're not going to have a ton of success. Like I said, the money factor isn't like a 100% thing. There are, in every card game, there are examples of budget decks that have success because they were backed by a very, very, very skilled pilot. But I don't want to discount also that, like, there's a reason why cards are expensive. It's because they're good or they're high rarity. So yes, money plays such a big factor, but I don't want to discount skill. I don't want to discount skill in any TCG, because if skill wasn't a factor, then why are there different tiers of players in each card game that consistently top events and consistently win or whatever? Like, if you look in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's a lot of the same people who are getting these tops. Why is that? It's not because, like, you know, their Flamber's Dragon is better than my Flamber's Dragon. I don't have a Flamber's Dragon, by the way. It's because they are better with it. My opponent's Sad Beast isn't better than my Sad Beast. It's because my opponent knows how to deploy it and what to do with it, and obviously that's just the one example I can make, but there's just so much decision making that goes into playing a TCG. So where do I really stand on it? Again, this is asking from the perspective of pay to win, of money. I think it's more in the 26 to 50% range, but like not above 40%, if that makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, I think money plays a huge factor. You know, it in so many cases, in so many formats, in many different card games, especially if it's like a tier 0 format and those cards are expensive and that's kind of like the main decks you should be playing, then you need to make the decision to shell out and get those cards. And if you don't have those cards and your opponent does, then most of the time your opponent is going to have that advantage over you. But if you do get those cards, that doesn't automatically mean that you're just better than everyone else, right? You need to know how to use them and know how to implement them and know how to build your deck and, you know, study those matchups. So I do still think the majority of success is skill, but we can't sit here and pretend that money doesn't play a factor. So I would love to know what you think. This post got a lot of engagement, so I'd love to know what you think about it.